There's something that's hardly ever talked about when we think about the negative consequences of consuming pasin, and that's that a lot of people only focus on one question: does this affect me? Can it harm me? In fact, interestingly, most of the videos on the internet raising awareness about the negative side of consuming this content come from personal development, entrepreneurship, and mindset coaches, which, hey, is great because they've brought a lot of visibility to this topic. But there's another question that, for me, is also very important and that we need to start thinking about more. What does this do to a romantic relationship? Because the problem with puanis isn't just what it does to the individual's desire and the brain of the person who consumes it. The problem is also what it gradually does to intimacy, to the bond, to the way you look at your partner, to mutual trust, to stability in the relationship, even to commitment and fidelity. In fact, conflicts and disagreements in couples caused by pumam are often a reason for seeking help. The most common scenario is that she experiences it as something problematic, while he sees it as something harmless. So in this video, we're going to take a deep look at how consuming petas can harm a romantic relationship. I'm Claudia Nicolasa, a psychologist, and on this channel we analyze TV shows, movies, and current events from a psychological perspective. Subscribe if you're interested. Alright, I've chosen 3 factors that explain why consuming pasas can harm a romantic relationship. The reasons I believe have the most impact and that we psychologists most often see in our sessions. First reason, it trains a type of desire that isn't compatible with real relationships, especially long-term committed ones. If we look at it from a learning perspective, arousal doesn't appear in isolation or spontaneously out of nowhere. It is shaped through repetition, learning, and arousal. In other words, desire is also learned and trained. The brain and body start associating sexual arousal, pleasure, and reward with certain stimuli, rhythms, contexts, and ways of interacting. And when a person is frequently exposed to the same pattern of arousal, that pattern can end up becoming a preferred pathway to arousal, or in the worst case, as the only way to get aroused. In other words, one of the main problems with habitual pan consumption is that it can train a desire system that later doesn't fit well with the dynamics of a real relationship with a partner at home. Why? Because pana operates with a logic of high intensity, constant novelty, immediacy, great stimulus variability, and an absolute predominance of the visual component. That is, it puts something in front of me that is always newer, more intense, more impactful, and faster. And I get used to that. In this way, the arousal system gets used to responding in a context of high stimulation, minimal waiting, immediate access, and constant change. You get to your couch or your bed, turn on the screen, you don't have to do anything, there's no waiting, there's no gradual build-up, and boom. All of a sudden, you have everything. And how does this affect a romantic relationship? Well, as with any learning process, this gets generalized to other related contexts. It's inevitable, and I really mean it, that what you imprint in your mind and body when you're alone will affect what happens later with your partner. That learned pattern carries over into your relationships, and that's when the big conflict arises, because a romantic relationship simply doesn't work that way. Intimacy in a relationship needs something this kind of consumption doesn't teach. Presence, connection, gradualness, communication, creating that experience together. It's something slower, more gradual, more patient. And it requires initiative, proactivity. It relies on many other senses like smell, touch, and hearing, senses that have probably become very inactive because you've only been relying only on visual stimulation from that content. Not to mention that if we're in a stable relationship, couples who have been together for a while and live together, well, there's tiredness, there are different emotional states, there's habituation, and it's no longer something new or stimulating. And in those situations, desire is more responsive. You have to seek it out, you have to spark it. It doesn't just appear spontaneously and intensely like it does on screens. And in that sense, I really want to recommend that you watch this video I uploaded about how to improve desire and passion in a relationship. From a psychological viewpoint, there are many ways to maintain desire and passion. You don't need to do anything drastic or open up the relationship or consume penekas to feel novelty and excitement in the relationship. So I'll leave it for you at the end so you can check it out. Continuing with the negative consequences of consuming patches in a relationship, what happens when someone trains their mind to get aroused by this kind of content? Well, what happens is that it becomes difficult to get aroused in more everyday, more human sexual intimacy. People who find it increasingly difficult to connect with what's real, with what's subtle, with what's gradual, with arousal that doesn't come from immediate stimulation, but from connection, context, and interpersonal encounters. And this, within a relationship, is very noticeable. In fact, one of the main reasons couples go to therapy is because he, usually the man in the relationship, has lost interest in connecting with his wife. From their point of view, they often say things like, he wants to have sex, but he doesn't want to have sex with me. He wants to have sex with my body, but not connect with me. This is a very common complaint when these men basically want to use their bodies to act out porn scripts. And when the therapist explores what's behind this conflict in the couple, what is usually found is regular and solitary consumption of porn. What else do they usually notice? First, there's less initiative from their partner, which leads to fewer or no sexual encounters. It's also noticeable in that disconnection during intimacy. He's no longer present in the same way, or maybe he never was. You also see intimacy experienced with less curiosity, less playfulness, and less genuine desire. It turns into that wham, bam, thank you ma'am kind of situation, as people often say. Couples who are aware of their partner's use and point to it as the source of the problem. This leads to arguments, misunderstandings, and even breakups. Because many people don't believe or don't want to believe that PN is something problematic, but in other cases it happens in complete secrecy, and the partner may misinterpret the situation. She may interpret it as a lack of love, lack of attraction, loss of interest, or lack of commitment, even suffering from low self-esteem, thinking that this happens because she is no longer attractive as a woman. I'm putting all this in terms of man and woman because that's how the situation most often presents itself, but of course this affects all of us. But that's not where it ends. It doesn't just affect desire and sexual interest, it can also create a dangerous gap between what each person wants in bed. Porn can be at the root of many mismatches in desire and arousal between partners. How? Well, if someone's sexual response is highly conditioned by the logic of porn, they may start to require more immediacy, more intensity, more novelty, or more extreme stimuli to get aroused. Especially in the current context, where consumption data shows us that more and more extreme and intense content is being used, and often it even brushes up against the limits of morality, humanity, and even legality. And while the partner who consumes now seeks the same things in their real relationships, the other person might still be operating from a completely different pattern. Slower, more contextual, more emotional, more relational. So we're no longer just talking about a difference in desire. We're talking about a difference in sources of arousal, in expectations, and in the way each partner understands and experiences the sexual encounter. This discrepancy can cause a lot of frustration because one may start to perceive the couple's sex life as insufficient, disappointing, while the other may feel pressured to do things they don't want to do. Or they may lose interest in being with their partner because their partner expects things that aren't normal or that they're simply not willing to do. A relationship deteriorates when intimacy stops being a space for connection and starts becoming a space for disconnection, of frustration, of lack of coordination, of incompatibility. And in fact, we are seeing more and more breakups because of what's called incompatibility in bed. And yes, obviously each person can have their own tastes and preferences, but many times these incompatibilities are not organic, they're not natural. They come from watching porn. Let's move on to the second reason. It increases FOMO, reduces commitment, and can even raise the likelihood of infidelity. I know what I'm about to explain might be a bit controversial, but porn doesn't just change how you get aroused. It can also change how you see your partner and how you experience commitment and monogamy. If you think about it consciously or unconsciously, it introduces a mindset of constant comparison. Comparison of bodies, of reactions, comparison of practices, intensity, availability, newness, and well, this can erode the bond. Because when your mind gets used to constantly being exposed to unreal bodies, scenes designed to make an impact, and an endless supply of stimuli, your partner, the other person, starts to compete against the manufactured fantasy. And imperfect reality always loses when it competes against something designed to overstimulate and provide easy pleasure. It's like when you follow people on social media who seem to be perfect or have perfect lives. Even though you rationally know that's not real, that it's just content and a facade, you expose yourself to it, and so, unconsciously, your brain compares and you always end up losing. That's why the mind, when you consume too much of this content, can start to look at the relationship from a dangerous angle. What am I missing? What don't I have? What could be out there that I'm missing? What else is there? What am I giving up by staying with this person? This is what I call relationship FOMO. FOMO in English means fear of missing out, the fear of missing something, and both the pathology and social media have greatly increased this relationship FOMO. There's a greater tendency in our minds to wonder, to think if there might be something better out there. Think about it. In the past, each person saw very few other people in their daily life. Today, through digital means, we're exposed to a crazy amount of people, lives, names, and bodies. And the more this mentality is fed, the harder it can be. Why? Because in the end, committing means giving something up. Giving up options, experiences, and stimuli. And one of the things people struggle with the most nowadays is exactly that. Accepting that truly choosing also means losing other options. Porn, just like many other current consumption dynamics, feeds a window shopping mentality. There's always more, there's always something else, there's always a new stimulus, there's always something different. And from that logic, a stable relationship can start to feel less like something deep and more like a limitation. Of course, I'm not saying that watching porn automatically makes you an unfaithful person, but I do believe that it can facilitate certain psychological processes that in the end will weaken that relationship and that commitment. Because an important part of fidelity isn't just about holding yourself back. It's about taking care of the way you perceive your relationship, taking care of how you look at your partner, being mindful of what you expose yourself to, what you put into your mind, what you feed yourself mentally. If you get your mind used to distraction, to endless novelty, and to always thinking there could be something better, then maintaining a long-term relationship can become more difficult. Because long-term relationships don't survive thanks to passion, but thanks to depth, loyalty, the ability to repair, choosing your partner every day, and committing to your reality. And that clashes head-on with a culture that trains us to consume, to change, to try, to discard, to always want more. So now, the third reason. It makes it difficult to achieve full intimacy and trust. For some people, pornography isn't just stimulation. It can also act as a refuge from vulnerability, because sexuality in a relationship isn't just about physical pleasure. It also involves emotional exposure, letting yourself be seen, tolerating insecurity, feeling judged, opening up to the other person. And that, even though many people don't talk about it, is quite difficult for them. And again, we're mostly talking about men. In this sense, sexuality on your own can sometimes work as a way to avoid all of this. Because in the end, there are few things more intimate than sharing your sexuality with another person. It requires expressing your desires, showing need, vulnerability. It also requires patience, listening, empathy, and accepting that the other person won't always respond as you want or expect. It requires building something together, looking at each other. Real intimacy demands things that a screen doesn't ask of you. In other words, Paman doesn't force you to face certain discomforts. It doesn't confront you. It doesn't require communication nor empathy. It doesn't make you see the other as a person or truly reveal yourself. And I know it might sound a little strange, but we're seeing a lot of people who prefer to take refuge in this digital world and Paman philosophy. The more they take refuge there, the harder it is to connect with others. When a person gets too used to a desire experienced alone, in private, and in a struggle, with the logic of I control everything and everything responds to me, it can then be hard for them to handle the complexity of real intimacy. So the relationship starts to seem more and more tedious, more uncomfortable, it feels like a hassle, there's resistance. When in reality, what's happening is that a real relationship demands things that a screen doesn't. Presence, reciprocity, reconnecting, vulnerability. The result? There are people who have a partner and don't enjoy being intimate with their partner for this reason. They go through them in a superficial way, just trying to get it over with. They directly avoid them and wait to have a moment alone and in secret so they can interact with their beloved screen. It's sad, but it's real. And that gradually cools the bond, the trust, the emotional connection in the relationship. It doesn't just affect sexual encounters, because a couple doesn't only need sex. She needs to feel chosen, seen, desired, found, taken into account. And when someone feels that the other person is more and more absent, more disconnected, more focused on private stimuli, it's not just the sexual part that gets hurt. Trust, self-esteem, even the image you have of the other person all suffer. And if that goes on for a long time, it can create a lot of resentment. It can lead to arguments, emotional distance, and eventually a breakup. To finish, I want to point out that, of course, we shouldn't generalize completely. Not every case is the same. These things won't happen just because of occasional use. From my personal and professional point of view, I'll be clear and say that my recommendation is not to consume any of it, especially if you're in a relationship. But if you're going to do it, you should try to look for content that's as similar as possible to what you'll actually encounter in real life. Realistic, human content that doesn't overwhelm your stimulation threshold. And keep in mind what extreme and intense content can do to your brain and your relationship. If you're in a relationship, it's important to discuss this together. How each of you sees it, how it affects you. If you're going to consume it, what kind of content you're going to consume. What are you both comfortable with? For what purpose will it be consumed? Of course, when something is done in secret, with lies and hiding, that's probably going to be a source of conflict. That's why, for me, the real question isn't just what you like, what turns you on. The more important question is what kind of relationship you're building with what you put into your mind every day. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm looking forward to reading your comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.